Dr. David Novak. Dr. David Novak is the director of the Weather Prediction Center. In this capacity, he is responsible for the overall provision of forecasts of rainstorms, winter storms, and extreme temperature events over the United States up to 7 days in advance. The Weather Prediction Center is at the meteorological heart of the weather enterprise and is interwoven into the U.S. Readiness Framework for Extreme Weather. The center is also a catalyst for collaboration among the National Weather Service forecast offices, driving consistent messaging for partners. Dr. David Novak received his bachelor's degree from St. Cloud State University, his master's from the University of Albany, and his PhD from Stony Brook. Dr. David Novak, the floor is yours.
They put the Stony Brook table right in front here. This is great. So, shout out to Albany, shout out to Albany. Everyone else here. Hey, just congrats. This is amazing. What longest student-run, student-organized conference in the nation's history, from what we understand. So just incredible, and incredible as you were highlighting. Just organized by students. That's just incredible. So, so another round of applause here, really. So we're going to look back. We'll find if I'm on the guest list and such. From 2001, I believe I attended the conference in Saratoga Springs. So listen, 25 years later, you might be up here too. So just knowing that. So listen, I am just honored to be here, and I'm gonna eventually get to this topic. So it's a little, in the weeds, a little bit of probabilistic winter storms, a little winter. We'll talk about that. But first, I wanted to highlight kind of my origin story a bit, and kind of be a probabilistic sandwich, if you will. So we'll talk a little bit about origin, we'll go into some of the meteorology and such, and then we'll end with some career and, yes, even some job opportunities. So I've really been shaped, I think, by my upbringing. I grew up in Minnesota, and Minnesota has plenty of weather extremes. I grew up in southwest Minnesota, and I do remember the 1988 drought. It was kind of this question about, well, how, why is it having such an impact on the agricultural community? I mean, we're seeing, financial impacts of this and other aspects. Loved blizzards. In fact, I would be that guy. I would go out and anyone else do this? Walk in a blizzard? Just because? Holy cow, my mom would be, she's like, you're not alone, what? One time I was out in the blizzard walking, and I called the cops because they wanted to make sure I was safe and would be home, and all this kind of stuff. So I love it. And so I do remember doing trick-or-treating in the 1991 Halloween blizzard. It was a major event, still out there. A major event in the upper Midwest. It was actually the same time, it was a few days, it might have been like 2 days before the great storm that hit in the 91 late October gale along the New England coast as well. So kind of an Omega block aspect, but I certainly have memories of that. And then actually a F5 tornado hit a small community of Chandler in southwest Minnesota. So all those events, you kind of see that's over about a 5-year period there with a drought, a blizzard, Chandler tornado. And I think really it was this fascination, and you're living in it and kind of want to know why, right? The curiosity of what causes a drought, what causes a blizzard on your Halloween, what causes a tornado. I got into research. We'll talk about how I evolved here, but I do want to highlight evolve towards various papers and do write up your work. It is important to communicate that work. I think that is one of the important aspects. And this is me, my wife, and my 12-year-old son recently, and just really, I really owe so much to them. I mean, as you go through any career, it really is the family that keeps it going here. So I guess I didn't order these. Just thought it would be simple here. I grew up in Minnesota, and even in high school was keeping weather records. My mom showed me from 1991, I guess I was keeping weather records in a notepad, back in southwest Minnesota. We actually moved to northern Minnesota, I would be the kid. They used to have observers in the airport, and I would actually go to the airport and just hang out. So one of those aspects. So anyways, went to St. Cloud State University, so small but mighty meteorology program in central Minnesota. One day, walking the halls with the bulletin board of opportunities. This must have been 1998. And on the board was this thing about a fire weather technician in Alaska. And I don't know, it was old school. You'd actually take the little piece of paper, and I decided to grab it, call the number, and applied. They wanted information, sent that information up. Did not hear a thing. It's getting late. It's getting to be like late April. What am I going to do? I want to do something, some sort of internship. This was, I guess, my sophomore year, junior year in undergrad. And finally got the call, got an interview. I thought I did great. Going through the process, still delayed. I think it was on the order of early May, still not really knowing, the graduating year's coming up. Finally get the call, can you make it up here in the next week to Fairbanks, Alaska as a fire weather technician? I said yes. And so that was a huge leap. Hadn't really lived out in the state, really. But took the leap, and this is going to be one of the career advice aspects here. Take the leap. And guess what? I was not their first pick. So my first position, and then associated is close to the National Weather Service. Huge leap, not their first pick. The persistence, you don't win if you're not playing, right? So perhaps that's one of the messages. So a fire weather technician in Fairbanks, Alaska, during the summer. It was beautiful, just really exceptionally beautiful. I actually briefed smoke jumpers on the weather pattern. So that was kind of neat. And yes, they do have fires in Alaska, and it actually got quite smoky in central Alaska. I think we had a high temperature of 90 degrees for one of the days. So just extreme climate, right? I know you probably saw in the news, even now, I think they're 40 below right now, even in March. So imagine those just temperature extremes. I did go back and actually came back to St. Cloud State. I didn't put on here. I actually, during my it was 98, when we studied abroad in England. That was another big leap for about 6 months there. But anyways, came back to St. Cloud State, graduated, and excited to do that. Somehow, through my professor, knew a weather service employee, the Sioux, actually, Phil Schumacher at Sioux Falls. And applied for the STEP internship there. And it actually didn't work out. But he said, listen, there's this Duluth may have an opening. And it turns out, again, just kind of doing the talk, if you will, and it turns out, yeah, we can make this work in Duluth. So went to Duluth, Minnesota for a STEP internship, and was wonderful. Actually got to work on the forecast desk, did midnight shifts, actually integrated me in pretty quick. It was maybe about a month of kind of training, and then was right on into NWS Duluth. I had already known that I was going to Stony Brook at the time, or excuse me, University of Albany at the time. So we knew this was going to be kind of a short stint, but it was just wonderful. And so I know such programs are tough this time. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But any way you can get your foot in the door, you start networking, really makes a difference there. So I guess that's that dot in Duluth. I do remember a June day in the 40s with a 30-mile-an-hour wind, northeast wind off the lake. So it can be brutal there. Okay, so how did I get to, it's kind of a big leap to Albany. Well, it turns out my professor at St. Cloud State, he went to school at SUNY Albany, and I just really enjoyed the way that he taught. It was Bob Weissman was his name, and an interesting fellow, but in any regard, he, I did apply to Madison, I'll say that too, so, and North Carolina, but I don't know, Albany just took my heart there. So anyways, took the leap with my girlfriend at the time, who became my wife, and we loaded up the U-Haul and went out to Albany, New York, studied under Lance and Dan, Lance Bozark and Kaiser, And it was this research to operations philosophy. Really this, how do you connect research results to actual, tangible societal impact? And I just really thought that the program really did that. With the C-STAR program there, was actually able to work with the Weather Service a little bit there. And that actually connected to the next person, Jeff Wallstreicher, who was in the National Weather Service. He was also a Science and Operations Officer, connected with the C-STAR program. Turns out he moved to Long Island at Eastern Headquarters, and we kind of had a mutual love of snowbands and science and meteorology. So after getting my master's, was able to actually land my first formal start, I guess, of my National Weather Service career. Worked in the science division there. Got to love Long Island after about 5 years. I was telling the table here. So, and then applied for this position at the Hydrometeorological Prediction System, HPC. And nobody knew what hydrometeorological meant, and so we changed the name of the center like 3 years later to just the Weather Prediction Center, because we do just a whole variety of missions. So that was another big leap to go from New York to Washington. It's about the only transition, I would say, where it's actually a little bit more relaxed going from Long Island to DC. I was about the only person there. It's like, hey, they drive kind of nice down here in DC. So it's pride, right? Pride. So anyways, and then I guess I love it. I love it. We'll talk more about that. But then there, rose up through the ranks. I became director in 2014. I can't believe that's 12 years ago. But it's evolved. It's evolved. And I think part of this is, as you see, it is taking those leaps. Just being open to change, being open to evolution, and just taking a chance sometimes. So, yeah, and that passion. Let that passion show. So for me, it really was that research to operations. I see, maybe the researcher in the in the audience saying, I created this really cool new tool. A little flummoxed as to why people don't understand. It's the best thing since sliced bread, right? And then you have perhaps a little bit skeptical, but on the operator side, asking is it timely? Is it reliable? Is it better than what I already have? And that's the metrics they're thinking about. And so really it's this relationship of kind of thinking about the new research and kind of this back and forth with the operator, driving towards, honestly, better tools, better models, better communication, all of this for the benefit of society. And so again, applying science to help people is really what drives me, and I'm sure drives so many of us in this room. So that's kind of my origin story. I think you can kind of see how it kind of evolved around here. And I still pinch myself in terms of leading the Weather Prediction Center, championing the operational prediction of rainstorms, winter storms, and extreme temperature events. And my goodness, each one of those is a phenomena that is increasing and causing great societal impact. We'll talk more about that in the context of winter storms here. We're also the foundation of the nation's weather story. We do over 700 national media interviews per year. A deep integration into the nation's emergency response framework for these major disasters, weather-driven disasters. Do briefings with FEMA, U.S. Army Corps, cross-agency aspects, most recently National Security Council, and other aspects. And then research to operations. I do feel very strongly, if you're just on that operator side, and if you're not exposed, you're not rubbing elbows with the researchers, that's a problem. And if you're on the research side, and you're not rubbing elbows with the operators, that's a problem. It's really the interconnectedness and sharing of those perspectives that I think really is important to drive the science for the betterment of society. So that is a core part of the Center: science, service, and art. Okay, now let's talk winter storms. Who's a winter fan? Woo! Who's not? I know. So that's great. Yes. Who loves extreme rainfall? Okay. It's all related. Okay. So we got it all. So we're going to talk winter storms, but I do hope you can see how much of this relates to these other phenomena, across here. So I'll just say, hey, winter weather forecasting is a tough business, and just forecasting in general is a tough business. So on the left here, this is a sounding. You can see that little warm nose there, about 1 degree. I guess that's maybe about, maybe about 5,000 feet up. And that kind of wasn't expected. And then you get headlines from the Post of the New York City blizzard as a dud. Not exactly the snow apocalypse here. You've got the memes here of snow lovers from DC to New York reporting their snowfall totals. But then you go on the right side here, and again, 1 degree at about 5,000 feet. Just wild, right? And completely different outcome. Outrage after a few inches of snow brings New York City to a halt. The New York Post there always showing the damages there. So anyways, just 1 degree at 5,000 feet can make all the difference. And that is hard. That is hard. And then we expand out and kind of think about just these recent winter weather events. Did you know that 3 of the most deadly and damaging winter events this nation has seen have occurred in the 2020s? And that is adjusted for inflation. So we think about in the upper right here, obviously the Texas cold wave, snow and cold wave, just an incredible disastrous event. Actually, by some counts, over 200 dead in that event. On the lower right here, this is the Buffalo blizzard. And actually, the Buffalo blizzard really started out in the Pacific Northwest, just this incredible, intense cold front from coast to coast. And again, just heartbreaking stories coming out of an area that, of course, has seen blizzards, but not a blizzard like this. These are other pictures from what I call the Southern Shocker, January last year. It snowed a foot in New Orleans. I mean, what? Set records, state records in Florida. And what's not on here, but I do think, we'll do the stats, and it's going to take a little bit of time, but unfortunately, I do think the January event with the devastating ice in Mississippi, followed by extreme cold, numerous deaths, really did not get the play that it probably should have in awareness, but I think that's going to be either number 3 or number 4 in terms of the nation's most deadly and damaging winter storms. The superstorm still is on the top there, so that for 93, which of course the anniversary was just yesterday. So the point is that even adjusting for inflation, and even with a warming climate, we are seeing these incredible winter events that are causing devastation across the nation. So in the National Weather Service, we've actually I took a look at some of these events, I guess through the 2018-2025. Our winter program looked at different reports of about 10 of these events, not counting this year. And I just thought these were kind of neat statistics. And perhaps some of these statistics actually apply, I think, for rainstorms, for tropical storms, for other phenomena here. So typically of a historic and unprecedented nature in magnitude or location. You kind of think about that you would think that would correlate. 90% of these events, anomalous snow or ice. I thought this was interesting here. Featured significant model uncertainty or model performance issues. So majority, the NWP was cited as experiencing some issues, including underestimating the magnitude and intensity of some of these events, late shifts in the forecast, and some run-to-run inconsistency aspects. So that relates to the probabilistic aspect we're evolving towards here. And then the last one here, and this one kind of stings. So exhibited underwhelming public and partner response. So community response failures or communication issues were identified. And this really hits that last mile. You can have the very best forecast, and of course, if it's not understandable to the decision maker, if they don't take no action, it's a failure. It's a failed forecast in that respect. So that last mile, as it's colloquially called, is so important. Connecting the forecast to decision makers to make appropriate decisions. That's really becoming a strategic focus of the National Weather Service, and we'll be talking more about that here in a little bit. So in this context, thinking about approaches to the challenge here. And so this is a probabilistic approach. So thinking about products and language that are triggered by the level of certainty. So kind of a ready, set, go approach with outlooks in the broader range where you probably have large uncertainty, say, even 2 weeks out, thinking about the possibilities, maybe color coding that. Watches are generally calibrated to about a 50% probability of exceeding the various criteria. And then warnings are generally at 80% probability of exceeding the criteria and, of course, the event. Now, it's not always linear like this. We'll talk a little bit about this, but oftentimes it is. And sometimes this calibrating by these probabilities can be an effective way of communicating, having consistent communication with partners and decision makers. If you have a 50% probability at day 4, maybe higher, 80% probability of exceeding those, perhaps we should issue a watch that far out. Sometimes we don't have that confidence, and so sometimes that's okay. It's okay to issue a winter storm watch, say maybe just 36 hours in advance as the probabilities ramp up. So kind of thinking about disconnecting the timelines just a little bit from what the probabilities are here. So the point is specificity and urgency increases as the confidence increases. And again, we try to get as much lead time as we can, but that's really going to be dictated by those probabilities. Importantly, to that other aspect, and the last mile aspect here, is that impact-based decision support. So thinking not just in terms of strict criteria, but in terms of what it means in terms of impacts. Trevin actually mentioned this just last night, right, about our science can be difficult to communicate, but when you communicate in terms of impacts, it really is a common denominator for society there. So the National Weather Service really doubling down on thinking about impacts and being there eye to eye with the decision makers and interpreting this probabilistic information. Another key aspect here is to empower forecasters with various tools. So extracting information from the full ensemble distribution, thinking about reasonable best and worst case scenarios or alternative scenarios. On the lower left here, you might have seen these, kind of the low end amount, the expected amount, and the high end amount. And I'll admit that it's still controversial in some regards, because you do get ranges sometimes, the 2 to 20 inch, aspect here. But I think, as was highlighted last night, again, that transparency with the user, I think, is really important. And again, this is where the connection with the decision makers in explaining that, yes, if the system's a little further off the coast, gosh, it might be less than what we're putting as our most likely. And there are some scenarios that are more, so it can kind of help with that. On the right here is this idea of mining ensembles for common scenarios. We often train and teach ensembles as kind of the mean and the spread, maybe the distribution. In some events, you can actually get kind of clusters or many members that are similar, and then many other members that are similar, but it's a different scenario. So I know it's small here, but just highlighting, I guess these are 4 different scenarios out of the mean on the bottom there, which shows kind of a positively tilted trough. But within that is basically a ridge, a middle trough there, and then a deep trough. And so the 100 ensemble members, you can kind of, just a few of them may have a major nor'easter, but they all have a, 20 of those members maybe have that major nor'easter, 20 have a ridge, maybe 13 have, something in between, that kind of aspect. So we'll dive into that a little bit deeper, but that's been one of the new kind of approaches forecasters are now using in terms of ferreting out kind of the signal from the noise of the mean, if you will. We talked a little bit about this, the probabilistic precipitation portal. This is centralized location for probabilistic snow, ice, and rainfall forecasts and scenarios. So this was from the recent February event, showing the most likely expected amount. And then, yes, I'm showing it here. If you look, I clicked on New York City, and it says 4 inches to 29 inches. We'll talk about that in a little bit here. So this event is quite uncertain, I will highlight. But it is a nice interface of showing the probabilities, Actually just had an individual from the insurance industry highlighting how thankful they are for this information, of knowing the reasonable worst case and seeing that in real time. So I think it's mostly just getting the information out there for different decision makers. I love snow, I love snow bands. I did my PhD work on that. So on the left side here, I guess maybe that's 2 decades ago now, did this paper, and we actually manually, this was in Stony Brook, by the way, so manually identified, these high resolution model runs, and manually identified these, hey, here's a snow band, and here's how it evolved. Thinking about, well, I think you could automate that. So on the right here is actually what we have running at the Weather Prediction Center. It's a nice visualization tool. This was for, I think, the record 2020 snow band that had Binghamton of over 40 inches. So you can kind of see it's color-coded by the intensity of the snow object. This is using that mode MET application here. And it's a way of visualizing the uncertainty associated with a feature that we care about, an intense snow band. And so you can see, there was some north-south spread in this event. There seemed to be a lot of confidence there, but then it gets to be less certain further out. So just even these visualizations of these features are helpful in terms of telling the story. But again, we've been highlighting, it's really about the impacts. And the meteorology is hard enough. It is harder to predict the impact. Okay, so you have to almost have the meteorology solid, know how much snow and wind and such, before you then translate it into impact space, because that's yet more variables to consider in terms of the impact. So a growing field, this is your future, I think, in terms of translating some of that meteorology and thinking about, in a probabilistic way, the impacts associated with that meteorology. So one example, a nascent example, I would still say, is this Winter Storm Severity Index product, the WSSI. So on the left here, this summarizes the potential severity of community impacts from winter storms through both meteorological and non-meteorological factors. So what it actually does is take the meteorological factors in. It has algorithms that are estimating the impacts based on past impacts, so kind of a calibration of here's the meteorology, here's what happened with that event, and draws correlations. So you run it through that algorithm, and then you get kind of 5 levels of impact: minor, moderate, major, and extreme. The moderate is generally a warning criteria. Extreme is generally a record event here. The summary graphics is actually composed of the maximum impact of the 4 components. So you can kind of break this up into snow load, that's how heavy and how much the snow weighs. Actually, this was American Civil Society information that is drawn in here in terms of how resilient different parts of the nation's infrastructure are to the weight of snow. Kind of a neat layer, so you can layer on these different non-meteorological factors: snow amount, ice accumulation, and then blowing snow. Recent publication here by Caskin if you want to see more details, but really, it's one image shown on the lower left here. This would be the kind of the summary graphic for the most recent event, but a lot of science going into this in terms of both the meteorology as well as the impact algorithms, and continues to be refined. And then, so you can imagine imagine you have the GFS meteorology that goes into these algorithms of the resilience of the snow weight, and where there's trees, where they're not, what kind of trees there are, where the infrastructure is. You do that for one model, right? GFS, going through those algorithms to get a solution. Well, what the probabilistic WSSI does is actually take, I think it's 60 different meteorological inputs. So you can imagine a sampling of different ensemble members through those algorithms to then get 60 different estimates of what the impact would be. And then you can summarize that with the probability of minor impact, probability of moderate impact, probability of major impact, and so on. So kind of taking it to the next level in terms of a probabilistic framework. So I know it's a busy slide here, but it's been really, I think, amongst the first time we've now publicly starting to go out with this in an operational way, and it's actually highlighted pretty prominently on the WPC homepage. So getting at the probability of impact levels. Okay, we'll come back to that. Okay, and then the third aspect here, and of course extremely important, is effectively communicating. And this goes back to that critical last mile, you know, the aspect that in the majority of these troublesome winter events, sometimes it is a good forecast and it's not acted upon. So how do we fix that? And so the National Weather Service really doubling down again on eye-to-eye decision making, being there with the decision maker, understanding the context of their decisions, and being able to react and provide the information in the language that the decision maker understands. So here's the challenge. I almost like, so it is a legit scientific paper here by Milne et al. 2025 in BAMS. I do encourage you to read it. But to me, for amongst the first time, it really actually put into words, I think, how we feel in terms of the probabilistic communication banging our head against the wall. You know, it's not one thing. And so on the left side here, I mean, he went in deep. Okay, he went in deep. But he's highlighting that, well, what do you mean by probabilistic forecasting or probabilistic decision support? You can have probability of exceedance, so thinking about the probability distribution function, there's different ways to think about that. You can think about it in terms of representative scenarios, you know, that are meteorological consistent. We kind of talk about that in terms of maybe the nor'easter is going to go further inland or maybe it's going to go off the coast. You can have headline summary information. That's basically what's the summary statistics. What is the mean? You know, what does the ensemble mean? Or perhaps it's tracking some type of features. And then he recognized that for some applications, you actually need the full ensemble membership. If you think about impact models, like I'm showing, or hydrologic models, you really do need the individual QPF inputs. Summary statistics aren't going to work. They don't get into a hydrologic model. It just doesn't work that way. So I think it's helpful to just know how hard a problem this is. And yeah, this flow chart, I'm not going to go through a flow chart for crying out loud, but main point here is to highlight that probabilistic communication is complex, and I guess it took us to 2025 to document that in BAMS. So there we go. And here's the other aspect, right? It's not always an obvious signal that one of these extreme events is hiding in there, if you will, the Waldo of extreme events here. You know, we know that even our great weather models now can struggle to capture the full intensity of some of these features. They can be isolated or emerge out of an otherwise typical pattern. Even with a signal in the data, a plausible outcome can still be quite unlikely. I mean, that 29 inches in New York was still, you know, 10% probability of that happening. It was not likely in that forecast. And so sometimes, again, coming back to this, in that critical last mile, sometimes what works best is the human touch, the human forecaster saying, I've never seen this before, waving the red flag. So again, coming back to the human aspect of the communication. So again, hitting this point of need to be there in these complex decision environments. We actually had this was a study from 2018, looking at snowfall and winter decision making. And they highlighted about 10 different factors that are going through a decision maker's head of timing. Is the snow wet or dry? What's the wind? What's the temperature? What's the precip type? What's your confidence? What is the trend? Is it trending worse or trending better? And what's the actual snowfall amount? I mean, the amount of snow was almost, you know, one of many factors that are going into this decision space. And this was only the meteorological factors in that decision maker's mind. I mean, they're thinking about shift schedules. They're thinking about the cost, you know, all these different aspects. So again, main point here is that eye-to-eye decision support is critical. And so this just re-emphasizes again, you know, that even the little things, tone of voice, and how the information is briefed, if you're on the front lines of a fire or in the Emergency Operations Center, can really make the difference of a decision with the weather information. Okay, so I'm going to step through a little bit of the examples from the recent nor'easter, February 2026 nor'easter, which I know for some of you is a big disappointment here in northern New England. But wow, what an event along the coast. And look at that satellite image. Just incredible snowfall amounts and wind. I'll note, and again, even southeast Massachusetts, they're used to nor'easters. They were without power in some communities for over 4 days with this event. Perhaps a state record in Rhode Island. That's preliminary at this time. Just incredible amounts. So what I wanted to highlight was this process, right? We talked about kind of the probabilities kind of through time. So on the left here, just highlighting Thursday morning. The event really happened Sunday afternoon into Monday. Is the event here. And so you can see there were some probabilities of exceeding warning criteria, maybe on the order of 20 to 30% here in New Jersey. You can see through time, they do ramp up by Friday morning, even highlighting Boston at this time. And it was really that Friday when things evolved from maybe not so likely, but some possibility to, we've got over an 80% probability there. And then that ramped up Saturday morning. You'll note the watches, and then the Weather Prediction Center works closely with the local forecast offices when there's greater than 50% probability. That's the trigger to get on the phone. Let's talk it out. Let's talk about it. What are the factors? Sometimes there's impact factors, such that you might hold off on a watch or go with the watch here. So collaborated watch for a good portion there Friday afternoon, and by Saturday morning, blizzard warnings were up. Some areas had over 40 hours of lead time on this blizzard. That's just incredible. And so you can see how, from a probabilistic perspective, you can see how, the probabilities kind of ramped up through time, and the watches and warnings really were consistent with that. So really kind of a success here. Here's an example of the Winter Storm Severity Index. So on Friday, highlighting some possibility of major, really ramped up here on Saturday. And if you stare in there's a few extreme, and then it was really Sunday morning when large portions were highlighted in the extreme. What really blew me away here was the probability. Again, this Winter Storm Severity Index, probability of major impacts. Kind of like that Where's Waldo? It was there day 6. The signal was there. Now it was small. It was 5-10% probability. But it didn't go away, and in fact, you go to day 5, maybe up to 20%, day 4, touching 30, day 3, maybe 40, 2 days in advance starting to ramp up there, and day 1, as you would expect, 24 hours in advance, high probabilities here, and actually higher probabilities in southern New England than New Jersey at that point. So again, this was major impacts. This would be just below record, but a major storm. Here was basically the probability of a record event with the extreme impacts. Even on day 6, there was a small signal. It's interesting. So again, this probabilistic process can highlight some of these hidden features in the data. And you can see, again, really was from about day 3 to day 2 where there was this big ramp up in that kind of Friday to Saturday time frame. But again, even that, 48 hours of notice on a blizzard, that used to be unheard of. So we have come a long way, and with some of these tools, we actually have signals to prepare folks, days in advance. Not to say it wasn't easy. So this was New York. These were the various plumes of the various ensemble members. They had 22 inches at LaGuardia. And maybe if you squint, you could see kind of a cluster on this area here, maybe towards 5 to 10 inches in this area. And then maybe a cluster of scenarios here that were more high-end. And it is interesting. We have tools that can actually dive into these clusters. So if you just looked at the ensemble mean in the upper left, that's a big snowstorm. That gets you excited. I know it's a big disappointment for Vermont. I know that. But that was actually composed, again, hidden in this, were cluster 2 and cluster 3 here. So cluster 1 looks a lot like the mean. It's about 43% of the distribution looked about like the mean. Cluster 2, that's the one that was further off the coast. This is about a third of the solution. Was not that big of an event for the lower Hudson Valley, not that big of an event for eastern Pennsylvania, for example. And then cluster 3 was all in, which basically did happen along the south coast of New England here. And that was only about a 23% part of the distribution. So, instead of perhaps the 2 to 29 inches or whatever it was, communicating in terms of these scenarios that, maybe the most likely was about a foot, but there were some scenarios a little lower if the low is further off the coast, higher if it's more intense. So we're starting to have these tools where we can visualize these aspects and kind of summarize that information. And then just pulling it all together here, there's a human synthesis. We get plenty of media questions about, did you see the GFS? It's like, yes, we saw GFS. We saw the European, we see 100 ensemble members, actually 200 ensemble members. And I really, no single model has it solved. There are biases, pros and cons with every single model, even the NAM, which I know we are phasing out through time here. But in any regard, it's that human synthesis with the expertise, knowing the pros and cons here. And so there was awareness of a major event here on the 17th, 18th. They actually the hurricane hunters actually flew into the East Pacific, did drop sounds, extra data to help with the forecast 3 days later. So get the jet stream, get the shortwave, get that upstream nailed down to better predict the system. Key messages, states of emergency were issued, again, when the sun is shining. To have a governor issue states of emergency before the storms form, when the sun is shining, that is still amazing. That is science for the betterment of society. And so we've come a long way there. And again, we have more to go. If we can keep those narrower distributions, maybe I'll be more confident. But really a very positive application of this process. So one last pivot here. So let's talk jobs. Okay. So I do want to emphasize, and I even was glad to hear a real mentor of mine, Dr. Bill LaPinta, was taken away too soon, but NOAA has established what's called the LaPinta NOAA Student Internship Program. It's amazing. It's competitive applications, but I encourage you as an undergraduate student, it's an undergraduate program, apply. Again, take that leap, take that chance. You're not going to win if you're not playing. And so just noting that. I do know they've closed it for this year, application process, but it will open up again next fall. So just keep that on your bingo card, if you will. The Hauling Scholarship Program, probably more competitive, harder to get into, but I know there's talent in here. And again, if you're not playing the game, you're not going to win. So, why not apply? The Weather Service is hiring. Okay? It is slow. I will say that. I know at AMS we did have a hiring event. I know it was only 5 entry-level positions, but it's a start. We do have permission to go bigger, and we're going to time it for the spring. So some of you perhaps are graduating in the May timeframe. The goal is to actually have an announcement that will be out on the street about that time. Fingers crossed, a lot to go through here. But again, if you're not in USA Jobs, you don't have your alerts set up for them, you might miss it. So again, get in USA Jobs, okay? Just highlighting that again. You're not going to win if you're not going to play the game here. So get an account on USA Jobs, get your resume ready. If you have a contact at the National Weather Service or just know of somebody, or maybe you just ask, say you're a local student in the area, connect with your local office, and any advice on the application process. And then, I get it, it's not just government work, right? We've got plenty of the private sector and nonprofit and cooperative institute aspects. There's incredible opportunities, really, in this entire weather enterprise. So do not, just even Googling opportunities, that can work, that can work. Again, your passion showing through, that's what really sells it. I mean, you've got to have the degree, you've got to have the chops, if you will, but it really is about that passion and what's unique for you, to show that through for you. So just a word on careers here. I do think, I am adamant about this. You still got to know synoptic and mesoscale meteorology. You still got to do that. Okay. So not gonna no jail, get out of jail free card here. And actually, it's that plus something else. So The environment has evolved where, yes, meteorology, go deep, but is there something else to enhance your resume? Something like coding or the communication aspect? Perhaps you're doing something with emergency management, or perhaps you're doing something with communication. Something to just make you stand out from the crowd is always a good thing. Be ready. Have that USA Jobs account ready. Update your resume. Have that resume ready. That is so amazing. You're doing the resume review here. Just great work. Kudos to doing that. Don't give up. Be persistent. Like I said, I was their second choice in that first job. Be persistent. It shows. It's actually a part of showing your passion and showing that you have the drive to do it. So, and be open to take a leap. I took that leap to Alaska. You never know what door may open, and don't be afraid to walk through the door. Last thing, just kind of a fun thing here, never lose sight of the big picture. Sometimes, whatever that is, maybe it's your passion for meteorology, maybe this is more maybe life advice, okay? I just kind of love this sequence here. So you're looking at this guy, I'm not entirely sure what the situation is. He's under a shadow. What's that shadow? It's a bit of tire. Why is there a bit about him? I don't know. But this is the point of, maybe even meteorology, you think you know the situation, but you gotta look bigger, and maybe you even gotta look hemispheric here. So just kind of a weird, I guess it's a weird cartoon, but because I'm not sure why we have a crane in the desert or a man going to see water. But in any regard, the point here is to never lose perspective. Sometimes, whether it's in meteorology or in your private life or in your career, these kind of aspects. So winter storm forecasting is difficult. But I do feel with the variety of products and tools we have, we actually have an opportunity to calibrate that communication with a problem-listening perspective. Not saying it's easy, but I think that is being transparent with our users and helps build that trust. More and more sophisticated tools available to alert for these low certainty but high impact events. That last mile is so important, and effective risk communication is essential in really helping decision makers make critical decisions. And just again, not saying it, the Weather Service is hiring. Get your USA Jobs account ready, your resume ready, and we're looking forward to the spring. So with that, deep appreciation and looking forward to your questions. So let's get it started. Hey.
Excellent speech. I was wondering if you had any advice on how to just cut through all the signs and reach straight to the person you're trying to get to. And obviously that's a huge market at times, but something that you think could apply to everyone that's listening or watching.
Yeah, so I'm not a broadcast meteorologist, never was. Let's just say that. And so, for the National Weather Service, it really is, again, kind of that eye-to-eye connection with the core decision makers. I think it's understanding what decisions they're making, what their thresholds are, the language. So it can vary. And I think it's very kind of specialized in that regard. So that is a different approach, right? That's pretty specialized, kind of connecting with that particular decision maker and their criteria. I think, the keynote yesterday in terms of thinking about, as opposed to the broad terms, thinking about talking to your mom or your brother or, in terms of highlighting maybe these scenarios. I think that's one of the approaches that does seem to kind of cut through. And then, as was mentioned yesterday, I think the impacts of highlighting, regardless of exactly how much snow we're going to get, you're not getting out of your driveway tomorrow, that kind of aspect. So, but I do, this is why we need the risk communication science, really partnership with our science, because we may know the science, but humans are complex, and how we synthesize information is complex and varies by individuals. So, and actually the National Weather Service is embracing that with a variety of different risk communication techniques. So, yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Bob Cox, broadcast and forensic meteorologist based in Central Connecticut. I have a question about after the upcoming reorganization of the National Weather Service is complete, could you comment a little bit about how much WPC will be producing in terms of providing the 0 to 7 day forecast versus how much input the local forecasts office is going to have after that? Yeah, so we're continuing to evolve. I mean, the science evolves and then the science changes. We really are emphasizing this local decision support, eye-to-eye, aspects. So still some discussion in that regard, but WPC is going to play a big role in a lot of the gridded forecast aspects, but that's not the complete picture, right? It's a lot of these products being there in the emergency operations centers, connecting with users, and the mesoscale. So very important at the local scale. So, I'm just gonna drink here. Flying in, just impressed by the topography here, of course, and the fact that downslope winds, and just to know those local aspects is so important. So, yeah.
With the shutdown of DHS, do you know how it affected the decision making of the local EMs?
Say it one more time.
With the shutdown of DHS, do you know how it affected the decision making of the local EMs?
Yeah. Actually, FEMA, I'm not going to speak to another agency's, work, but, the fact that in this major event that roads were open, I don't know, actually 2 or 3 days, well, even really the next day, in a lot of areas, except for the hardest hit areas, I think speaks to the preparedness. And so always prioritizing the mission aspects. So I'm really proud of the National Weather Service here in the prediction and ensuring, again, that eye-to-eye decision support with our partners, really connecting. And I think largely it was a major success in terms of preparing communities. Again, the near record lead time on that particular event. They're not always that good, okay? We know that. And that's where this probabilistic approach, where if you have shorter lead time, can be more challenging. But if it's calibrated to the probabilities, there's that trust with that decision maker that you're not going to cry wolf. I think this is one of the aspects, that when it's greater than 50% probability, and yes, it's a day away, I mean, you hadn't been talking about it, now we are, we really mean it, the emergency response framework can ramp up pretty quick. It can. But it does take that deep partnership and that eye-to-eye, aspect there. Yeah.
How do you message maybe one of those late model shifts? Say, for example, the rain snow line shift really far north and like the day before, and all of your emergency management partners have already issued their states of emergencies, and you have a whole bunch of watches now, warnings, and they're clearly going to bust.
Well, if it's known they're going to bust, and we do this, local offices will take, go from a warning to an advisory. I think that is important to update the information. Again, that goes back to being transparent with the users. So I think that's important. That's why we are somewhat more cautious, slowly ramping, we like to ramp up. That is part of the risk communication aspect. Folks will anchor. This is a human aspect of anchoring on kind of the first piece of information they see. So this is one of the challenges of providing lead time, is they might anchor on that, but that may not be the right answer through time. And so, I mean, oftentimes we highlight, check back for latest information. Again, kind of this constant, not a one and done, but the constant information update. But I'm not going to say that's not easy, right? I mean, if the warning's out and, like if this blizzard didn't happen, we would hopefully have some, lead time on pulling things back down from the warnings back to the advisories. It's a tough business, folks. And again, that's why having probably the probabilities, you can rely on an anchor to that if it's 80% probability, we're quite confident. Yeah, that's this challenge. So just paraphrasing, I think the question is, yeah, how do you do, again, very similarly, if it's a no snow forecast 3 days in advance and one day it's, hey, actually we're going to get a major snow event, how do you make sure and communicate that change? And I think that's part of the risk communication research, really. And different people react differently. We know that emergency management, for example, local mayors are critical nodes that can influence others. And so, again, by having this eye-to-eye connection with emergency managers, mayors, other community officials, that is actually a node of information. Maybe they do a quick press brief or say, share that information broadly, so tweet from emergency management, that kind of aspect, that as a trusted local official, that they can share the word quickly. But it's hard. And so that's where this, again, the probabilistic framework, where you're kind of triggering these levels based on the underlying foundation of what the probabilities are saying. Again, that means they've got to be calibrated and good, but we are getting to a point where they can be quite effective in that way with a human oversight and thinking about that. We'll go here and then here.
I was just curious how you see the techniques used in probabilistic forecasting changing as the ability to foresee weather in a sort of medium range 3 to 7 day time frame improves, and if you think improving models are going to change how you are able to provide that forecast.
What is an interesting follow-on from the anchoring risk, right? So we're talking days 3, 5, 6, 7. I didn't bring up AI yet, did I? Here we go. AI and then NWP emulators are impressive in that day 3 to 7, large scale, synoptic scale, ridge trough pattern. No question. I think that has really been a revolution, frankly. Recent tropical season with the Google Deep Mine and how impressive it's been with the Atlantic hurricane tracks. Transformational step there. So going into this winter season, Weather Prediction Center, Winter Weather Desk folks were all like, well, is this, we've got the AI GFS, we've got the AI AFES, PAMGOO, I don't know, you got them all, right? And thinking, well, is this a transformational step for winter storms? And it really wasn't. I don't know that we know why, but maybe in the medium range, yes, sort of. May is about a 5% improvement over the traditional NWP, but it wasn't this stepwise advancement that we saw in tropical cyclone track, or even in the medium range, just large scale with AI. So it is just interesting. AI's got to be trained on data sets, and so I think there's a lot left to learn here. And we've always had a philosophy of AI assisting the human, and I think that we'll continue that philosophy, but not be blind to it. Obviously, it can be transformational for some elements and for some aspects that perhaps it has a long training data set that's curated. So, long way to say that, I do think the medium range, listen, day 4 now is the new day 3. That's the way to put it. As, in terms of skill as improves. And I think AI actually has accelerated that in the larger scale. But in terms of impacts, when you get to that specificity, we're just not there yet in the medium range. Yeah, great questions.
You mentioned trust a lot. So I want to tell a short story, if I may. This just happened in central New York, where I'm from, where a winter storm warning was issued for lake effects in the Buffalo Weather Service agreement. Everyone and their brother knew that the whole county was in the warning. Well, everyone and their brother knew that it was the higher elevations that were going to get the 12 to 18 inches. So my wife works in the school district, in Oswego, Central New York. Everyone's panicking. They're like, oh my God, we're under a winter storm warning. What are we going to do? Blah, 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 blah. This happens so many times these days. Why has the Weather Service not gone to polygon-based warnings for winter weather events? Because the public thinks we're a joke when this happens. And this is why trust is eroded and why we're made fun of like lawyers. Oh, you can get paid to be 50% right. This is huge in terms of the trust. We've gone to polygon warnings with springtime.
Yep.
Why the hell haven't we done that in winter?
Yeah. No, we're trying. I will say we're trying. So we do have hazard services as one of the techniques that's used in the warm season, and actually there are plans to use hazard services for winter aspects. So I think, yeah. The other aspect is these zones sometimes are too big. It's another aspect. So highlighting, some of these aspects and doing what we can to fix them. So yeah, thank you for raising the issue. I think, I think getting to polygons and, actually, it's a human thing, right? Of almost like that's the area and that's the area. Or it's above, 2,500 feet or something like that.
I walk to work, and my neighbors are like attacking me. They're like, what do you mean with winter storm warning? I'm like, it's the elevation, and we know that.
Yeah.
And I think I've talked to my friends at the Weather Service Buffalo, and they're like, it's the federal government. It's slow. I'm like, come on.
Well, there are plans for hazard services to evolve in that way, although in a matter of years, about 2 years.
Okay.
But listen, we had a blizzard warning, 40 hours. If you again, kind of going back to perspective, right? Like the bigger perspective here is over the last 20 years, the arc of science has really made a tremendous improvement in society. Right? So I think we always can do better. So, but not to dismiss how far we've come and how far we're going to come with your help. So and your passion. Okay, one more question. You get the honor of the last question.
Awesome. To tag along with what the professor was saying with moving towards polygon, I know that one of the biggest stereotypes, at least in meteorology, is the fact that we don't tell the truth. I do know about the Facets initiative that was taken by the WPC and was used during 2019 to 2020. I don't know if that's still in use, and how is that going to benefit future warnings and predictions?
Yeah, so that really is this. That is this in a lot of ways. It's again those probabilities, low probabilities through time, and evolving through confidence, and calibrating our language and certainty to those probably triggering. Watches that say a greater than 50% probability, and a warning at greater than 80% probability, with impacts on our mind and some subjective factors. So I would say it's being implemented. Is actually how I would phrase it. So thank you so much. Just an honor to be speaking in front of such talent. Let your passion show through. That's perhaps the key message I want to leave with you. And I'll hang back for further questions. Just thank you again for a great evening. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. David Novak, for the super informative talk. Let's give Dr. David Novak another round of applause, please.